Hello. With the holidays right around the corner, I think it's a fitting time to read a familial revenge story. So today we are reading Bad Nature by Ariel Courage, a book that came out earlier this year and that I was so drawn in by that I never even finished reading the summary because the first sentence got me. When Hester is diagnosed with terminal cancer on her 40th birthday, she knows immediately what she must do: abandon her possessions and drive to California to kill her estranged father. Yes, please. That was all I needed to know. So you and I are going into this together pretty blind. I'm only 50 pages in. I still have no idea what path the story is going to take and where the character is going to end up, and I am excited to find out with you. So it begins with introducing us to Hester, who I don't think has been addressed by her name up until this point. I only know it from that one sentence of the summary that I've read. That's because this is told in first person, and because Hester is a very isolated human being. Hester is a very interesting character, and I feel like every single page I'm learning something more about her, and it's creating a clearer and clearer picture of who she is and who she thinks of herself as, and the difference between those two people. She is a very wealthy woman who puts on the air of being someone who doesn't need anyone else, who is content with and even prefers her loneliness. She has no family, she has no friends, no lovers, no work acquaintances, and she likes to believe that this is all by choice. It's her 40th birthday, and under no circumstances does she want any gifts, or even for the people at her office, who are the only people that she interacts with, to know that it is her birthday. Her receptionist gives her this very nice leather-bound journal, and she thinks to herself that the only journals she's ever had have been like very few sparse gifts throughout the years, and they've always been used as kindling in her apartment fireplace, in her very luxurious white New York City apartment fireplace. Hester is very, very wealthy. She works as a lawyer for some unnamed company, and she says that she makes more in a year than her mom ever saw in her entire life. The comfort that Hester's wealth affords her is a little bit of plot armor, but as I've read on, I'm seeing that Hester's experience of wealth has more to do with her character's history and her childhood being poor than it does with the messaging that's like, being wealthy doesn't mean that you have it all. Look at this woman. She has so much money, but she's lonely. I don't think that's the direction that this book is taking, and God, I hope not. I don't think that's where it's going, largely because Hester is not a likable person who you really tend to feel sorry for. The best way to describe her personality is cold. She is ice fucking cold, deliberately and consciously emotionless, without being like super detached, which is a very fascinating combination and not one that I see all that often in fiction. Like I said, every moment with her gives us a little bit more because you don't get much from her own interior. You see who Hester is more in her interactions and her habits and her choices, because a lot of who Hester is who she is denying that she is, and who you have to understand through the way she speaks to others. In the first few pages of the book, she gets the bad news that you're expecting from that snippet of the summary. She has terminal breast cancer. Without treatment, she has 6 months to live, and with treatment, it'll be 2 to 3 years. She is upset at the doctor. She is enraged at this situation. In her mind, it's not because of the grim prognosis that she's just been given. It's because this doctor has looked inside her and now knows that she is vulnerable, that she's human, that she has a body that can betray her, and that no amount of her intelligence or her character or her life achievements could have saved her. In the end, all of that was irrelevant. He looked at her and he saw that she wasn't special, and she hates him for it. Outside of the anger and the hatred that she directs at this doctor, not for finding the cancer, but for seeing her as human and soft, she feels nothing because she wants to feel nothing. She wants her mind totally blank about this. And you get the sense that there are feelings that she has about this, but she considers them to be weak and would never relay them to the audience. I think it tells us a lot more about who she is than a big, relatable, emotional reaction to this news would. The doctor asks her if there's someone that she can call to drive her home, and she says she's almost yelling when she asks the question, why? Do I seem like I'm upset? That, I feel like, tells you so much about who this person is and about the biased way that she is telling this story to us. In this chapter, we've seen her look her father up online and feel angry when she sees that he's moved to California. Not because she wants him close for any chance of making amends, because she thinks what gives him the right to change after all these years. That's really all we see of the two of them in this first chapter, because she's dealing with the diagnosis and with quitting her job due to what she tells everyone is a family emergency, which she knows will confuse them because she works with people who know that she has absolutely no family, but she doesn't care. Of course, she has no one to confide in or to comfort her or support her with this diagnosis. She is quitting with the intention of driving across the country to California to find her dad and kill him and then herself. We get a little bit more of this father-daughter relationship in the second chapter, though she is showing tremendous restraint in telling us about it. It's quite obvious, though, that it was some pretty serious abuse that split her parents up when she was a kid. She calls it court-mandated. She's one of those people very similar to the titular Big Swiss in the book Big Swiss by Jen Began, who refuses to define herself by her trauma, but then that unaddressed trauma is, to any outside eye, clearly a driving force in every single decision that she makes and thought that she has. Hester says that she knew from a young age that she was going to end up killing her father. She remembers him calling the house after the divorce and her whispering through gritted teeth that if he ever called again, she would kill him. This was at 13 years old. Hester was sent to court-mandated therapy where the psychiatrist told her mom that her anger would mellow out over the years, but she says it never did. That anger became a core part of who she is and how she lives in the world. It's inextricable from her personality. Like I said, she is very cold, but you don't really get the sense that she's necessarily walking around all the time seething with rage. She's more bitter and hateful in a tired way. Even in the few pages before she knows that she's going to die very soon, it feels like she is done with the world. Not because she's depressed, but because she's angry at it and what it has done to her. But then at the same time, she refuses to be a victim. She's jumping through a lot of loops in her head. She is making herself someone that she can't possibly be. You know what I mean? Chemo isn't even really a choice that registers to her. Instead, she packs up her corporate lawyer wardrobe, her mom's ashes, and a gun into her fancy car, and she heads west. On the topic of her mom, it's important to note that her mom also died quite young of an aggressive cancer, and Hester watched the treatments that she had destroy her in the end. And that's obviously a large contributor to Hester's decision not to have any treatment. She also believes that her dad's, I want to say abuse, but again, she hasn't called it that, and she's trying to step around what her father has done to her and her mom and their family. So I won't quite call it that, but she believes that his presence in her mom's life is what ultimately led to her death. There's a lot going on with Hester, okay? She starts driving in her fancy-ass car and she gets to Pennsylvania where she pulls over for some McDonald's, a meal that she hasn't had since her parents were still together and her dad would secretly take her out for it. In all of 10 minutes at this McDonald's, her car is stolen. She calls the police and they bring her back to the station and she's like, okay, well, I'm gonna need to buy another car. Can someone take me to the dealership? And the police look at her like she's insane. They're like, no, you can't just buy a new car in a state where you don't live. That's not how this works. It takes time to get plated and registered. Absolutely not. This is the kind of friction that the very wealthy can typically afford to avoid. As the book goes on, it's becoming more and more clear that this new money aspect of Hester's character is going to be quite meaningful. She acts like her wealth doesn't faze her, but growing up in a poor household with a dad who thought he was an artist and was waiting for his big break and never contributed, and then with a poor single mother, has had a very significant effect on her. She's also not someone who really knows how to be rich. She pays other people to figure it out for her, to decorate her apartment in a way that seems warm to guests that she might have, very infrequent guests that she might have, or someone to buy her clothes that would make sense for her high-paying job. Wealth is a privilege that Hester both doesn't fit comfortably into and can't possibly imagine her life without. After she ends up renting a car, of course, she picks up a man on the side of the road, John. She picks him up with the intention of having sex with him. Hester has had exactly one ex, which seems like it will be significant, but she does often have sex with men that she finds repulsive. There's something erotic about this to her. She does regret this intention with John, though, because he's kind of a preachy, annoying environmental activist in her eyes. In a way, he's a foil to Hester. He has really strong morals, which she does not. But like her, he is very misguided. He's been hitchhiking around the country taking photos of sites of industrial pollution, which, hell yeah, bring awareness. But also, as Hester points out, what is a photo of polluted soil really going to do? It's not like you can see the pollution in the photo of the soil. Having not read the entire summary, I had and still have no idea the significance of the character of John in the larger scheme of the story. The two of them make it to the next area of pollution on John's list, and despite his protests, she gets out of the car with him and they climb over the fence together. She has a few memories of her dad and her childhood here, but nothing that is all that telling yet. It's like her asking him why the sky is blue and him insisting that it's green. It gives you a little bit, but I think more upon reflection once we've read more of the story, you know? John and Hester are caught on this private US property and he runs, but she's like, I'm not going to do that because I don't really fucking care. She does have a memory here that's a little bit more important, I think, of her running through the woods as a child, feeling all shaky and disoriented, being whipped by sharp reeds, obviously escaping some danger. Presumably her father, but again, Hester keeps herself at such a distance from whatever this man has done to her that we really have no idea at this point. She tells the security guard that she was looking for her dog, and he knows that she's bullshitting, and he's kind of pissed off, but she doesn't care. She doesn't even make an effort to get him to believe her. He escorts her out, and she gets back to the car, and John is gone. And that is where I'm at so far. And I'm actually really loving reading a book that I don't yet have a sense of the trajectory of. Like, is that the end for John? Will he reappear in the next few pages and be a major part of this story? I have absolutely no idea. And I also don't know where we're going with Hester's character. I feel like there's kind of two ways that her arc could go, and I can see myself as being disappointed or satisfied with either option depending on the way it's done. Like, she kind of just either kills her dad or she doesn't. And I want her to kill her dad because, of course, like, I want the fucking drama. But I also think that there's a way that Ariel Courage handles this story where I'm all right if she doesn't do that. Though I feel like it'll be a harder task, and especially a harder task to keep in line with Hester's character. Of course, if I get a good ways into this book and I still don't know where the general arc of the story is headed, it'll be hard to care about what happens and there won't be very much tension. I'm sure there's a point where I get bored of this feeling, but right now it's kind of reflecting the unplanned cross-country road trip that Hester is taking, and I think it's very fun for the possibilities of the story to feel so open while the character herself feels so rigid and unchangeable. I also don't know if I'm supposed to be feeling like this because I don't know what the rest of the summary says and I'm not going to read it. I don't want to know anything else. All I want to know is that Hester's driving across the country to kill her father, and that's awesome. I am going to keep reading and I will update you somewhere in the midst of this, closer to the middle probably. I'll see you then. Okay, I'm back. We're now 130 pages in, which is a little bit under halfway through Bad Nature. So Hester keeps driving without John, and she gets to Pittsburgh, where her one and only ex-boyfriend now lives. Since her car was stolen, she no longer has any clothes, so there's a sequence where she goes thrift shopping. Of course, not because she has to. She has a lot of money. Have I mentioned that she has a lot of money? She goes thrift shopping for a little bit of nostalgia. There's a comfortable familiarity in it. It makes her think of her mom and needing to thrift shop with her as a kid. This is a quick scene, but I think it's really telling of Hester's character. She is in this thrift store buying completely random things. Sundresses and winter coats and like 7 sports bras and hiking boots. She has no idea what she's doing. She has no idea who she is, what she'll need, how she wants to express herself and project herself to others, how to buy things for herself, how to make choices. She is out of touch with herself and with like the simplest, most everyday decisions around how to be a human in the world. They are completely foreign to her. There's also a visceral quality to these unwashed thrift store clothes. She changes into one of the dresses that she bought, and she only realizes later that it's covered in the white streaks of someone else's deodorant, which even after noticing, she doesn't really care to put in an effort to change. Anyway, she puts this dress on before going into the restaurant where her ex Caleb now works as the head chef. She orders her meal and then immediately goes to the bathroom, but she takes a sharp turn into the kitchen, where she is now like in the back of house and comes face to face with Caleb. There's a moment where they stare at each other and she's struck some fear into his heart clearly, whether just through being in front of him unexpectedly or the unhinged method through which she's done it. She is escorted out of the kitchen before they can really say anything to each other, but she waits around for him to get off work, all the while thinking about their past relationship. The book doesn't quite alternate between memory and present day narrative chapters, but the memories are thrown in frequently and often told within their own chapters. So in this chapter, thinking about Caleb and their relationship, Hester remembers like like her aversion to and her hatred of and her disinterest in men and boys generally as a young woman, always thinking that what men do is break your heart and ruin your life because that's what had been modeled for her by her parents. In university, though, she made a hard pivot into excessive, impulsive, indiscriminate sex and promiscuity. She talks of men here as like creatures, all with similar motivations and dispositions and reactions that she has studied to get what she wants out of them, though never betraying herself or debasing herself in the process of getting sex, more like studying how to be her stony and argumentative self in a way that drew them in. So Caleb was the first boy who didn't just unquestioningly go along with her when she tried to kiss him in a club before they had even spoken a single word to each other. Their relationship lasted for a few years while they were university students, and we see both of their inauthenticities, thinking of themselves as different and special and better than everyone else for not succumbing to the demands of capitalism and the social contract, living in filth and quoting philosophy to each other. He's more like punk and activist and connected to others about it, while she is far more self-centered in all of her actions, and her lack of punk values makes his friends call his punkness into question. He also kind of seems like he hates women, and they have a toxic, cruel relationship where they are both mean and a little bit violent to each other. Hester, so interestingly, is very jealous of Caleb's ex during their relationship. This is not an emotion that we've seen from her ever at this point, and it's this kind of like meaningless, ordinary pettiness that you don't really expect out of her. She's also recounting it in a very candid way that she doesn't usually employ. She's not twisting this into something else to make herself look cooler and unexpected, like how she's done with everything else in the book so far. Every interaction with a person from Hester's past brings up memories that make her more human, and that she seems more okay with being human in. Caleb gets off work and he takes her to his apartment where he has this distant, cold, annoyance-masking anxiety persona that seems realistic for someone who has been randomly faced with an ex whose life he just up and disappeared from 20 years ago. He admits to her that he's going to start therapy soon in the hopes that his girlfriend will come back, and then Hester pretty much immediately starts undressing, which made me want to crawl into a hole. But it doesn't backfire miserably for her. They do have sex, and when they're finished, he admits that he had been afraid she was coming back in his life to accuse him of not being good to her. She says, "Oh no, I wouldn't do that. I chose to be treated like that," which is a loaded thing to unpack, and who knows if she ever will. She then gets him to tell her what happened in the intervening years, where he disappeared to, what has made him who he is now. He tells the story of running away from his life, really struggling with alcoholism, managing to secure jobs and housing, and then fucking it up over and over again. One day he was kicked out of his housing situation, and he showed up to his work as a janitor in an office, more intoxicated than he had ever been before, and he accidentally knocked over one of the office workers' like little plastic toys that he collected and put up in his cubicle. And the worker was pissed off and spoke to him very disparagingly and condescendingly, like people often treat janitors. Caleb, knowing that his life was falling apart, stayed after hours, collected all the toys in the office, and set them up like a little army in one of the conference rooms, and then passed out cold, waking up in the morning to one of the head bosses screaming in his face. This was one of the first things to ever like kick his butt into action. It sent him into AA, it got him to call his dad, who he'd always hated, and start to amend their relationship. I think it's interesting how I feel the need to relay this story that Caleb tells to you, because narratively, it isn't really all that important, and therefore it should be kind of boring when you read it. But it had me totally captivated. You can say that it's showing us Hester being drawn to other broken people, particularly ones with strained parental relationships, and I bet there's even more symbolic meaning in here that I'm missing, but this story acts more as an emotional catharsis and a closure for Hester, and for us, the audience, who are in her head this whole time. It also shows someone who has had it rough, who has been bad to others and is trying to be better, and it's not a totally inspirational view of this person. It's very raw and real, but it is someone that Hester could have ended up like, and it shows a version of Hester that she could have been, and that version is someone who is deciding to be better, deciding that they want to change. After he's finished his story, he falls asleep, and we then see the lack of reciprocation. Hester doesn't tell him anything about what's happening with her, and he doesn't ask. While he's sleeping, this is the first time that she lets us see her obsessing and panicking over her tumor, Googling all night long, like looking at images of tumors, and hoping, though she's not sure why, that he will wake up and ask her what she's doing so that she can finally have someone to tell. It is hard to like Hester with her casual cruelty and her self-imposed isolation and her need to be seen by others as uncaring and unbothered, but it's also hard not to feel sorry for her, a feeling that I'm sure she would resent, but that she's allowing us to do more and more as she peels back the layers of her life. Here with Caleb and in her memories of their histories together, we get to see her as the most flappable, emotional, weak, and human version of Hester that we've got so far. It's a stark contrast, but it's also not a complete betrayal. She still has her personality, but her feelings have been transported back to the way she was when she was in her early 20s. She's self-conscious for the first time in the story, the lack of which has made her very distant from any reader's experience of living in the world. While we're seeing a more nuanced version of Hester, we are also still seeing Hester. Like I said, this is still her personality, so of course she leaves before he wakes up in the morning. And while yes, there still isn't a sense of direction in the narrative or character arc, this chapter feels closed with her and Caleb. Though there isn't much in the way of resolution, which is more heartbreaking than Hester allows herself to feel. It's just like kind of the way things are with most goodbyes in any given person's life. Uneventful, unsatisfying, mundane. It's also sad that she's the only one who knows that this is their final goodbye, but it's more sad that this is one of very few final goodbyes in Hester's lonely life. She continues on her way across the country, heading for Chicago as fast as she can, but so devoid of stimuli on the drive that she starts thinking about her childhood and her father's impact on it. Their family home was very isolated in the forest, and Hester spent a lot of time alone as the only child and miles away from any other neighbors, outside in the woods, trying to avoid the tension in her household and her father's cruelty towards her mom. He was a remote thrower, he was a wall puncher, not in a way that's described as necessarily being short-tempered though. It seems more calculated than that. She tells a story of him rummaging through a cupboard in the kitchen before saying catch and then chucking a champagne flute at her mom's head. Even with more details, it's still difficult to conjure a full picture of what was going on in this house. When she was really young, before she had this unwavering idea that she would kill her father one day, Hester felt a confusing mix of admiration for and fear of her dad. The uncertainty of where to place an authority figure who should love and protect you, but scares you. Hester's finally drawn out of her memories when she pulls over to stretch at a gas station, and her rental car will no longer start when she gets back into it. It's evening at this point, and the gas station attendant is exceptionally unhelpful. They're in the middle of nowhere, and he tells her that no tow truck will come pick her up at this hour, no mechanic is open, there are no Ubers or taxis, no hotels in the area. She asks if he'll drive her somewhere, and he says, no, I have 3 DUIs. And she's like, aren't you like 16? And he's like, no, I'm 22. He does monotonously and flippantly offer to put her up in his grandparents' house for $200, which she knows they will see none of. She says, absolutely not, I'm not doing that. She goes back to her car. She has locked herself out of the car and all of her shit is still inside of it. So she turns around and she says, okay, fine, but I'll only pay you $150. Not that the money matters to her, just to make a point. They walk to his grandparents' place and the two of them don't even really look up from the TV when he tells them that she'll be spending the night there. And he then takes her upstairs and like bashfully kicks the floor and says, do you think I could get a tuggy? It'll be quick. It won't be too long. And she's like, oh, I'm sure it'll be quick. But no, we're not going to do that. The possibility of sexual violence is not lost on her, but she's also not too worried about it. She thinks if worst comes to worst, he's a scrawny, meek little thing and she could fight him off easily. She spends the night safe, but a little bit unnerved in the bedroom of the gas station attendant's dead mother. It's like a preserved time capsule with all of her stuff exactly as it was, and also a gun. There's a gun in a lockbox. She steals the gun. One sleepless night later, she goes down into the living room in the morning to find the attendant crushing up blue pills and snorting them with his grandparents just in the other room. And he's like, oh, they're old. They won't notice. They don't really notice this kind of thing. He also openly tells her that his mom committed suicide. She asks if she can buy that gun, and he says no. It's my mom's. And then he and his grandfather take her to the gas station and then follow behind the tow truck to the mechanic. The grandfather is there to drive the truck back after they drop her off, but she is the one who drives their truck there, which is fascinating. This is just like a group of very strange people who have all trusted each other to an almost disturbing degree. It's also once again Hester's tendency to be drawn to people with messed up parental situations. Though, she and I, and probably you, have misread how this gas station attendant feels about his life. When she says goodbye to him, he is very high from snorting the pills, and she tells him that she left him a bunch of money and he should use it to get out of his grandparents' house with like the shrine to his dead mother and the stinky ferrets. There were ferrets, by the way. They had 2 ferrets. And all glossy-eyed, he says, you're a mean lady. I love those ferrets and I love my life. You're hot, but you're so mean. And that is that for that interaction. We're getting into the groove of this book now. It's Hester meeting people who are always strange and intriguing characters and then kind of moving along on her way. The people she meets are reflecting things about her or bringing things out in her or reminding her of things or showing her alternate ways that her life could have gone, but it isn't beating you over the head with whatever it's trying to tell you with each interaction, which I do really appreciate because that gets tired fast and I don't want to be like preached at, and preachiness wouldn't work with Hester's voice anyway. I do think though that the intentions of these interactions are bordering on being a little bit too opaque. If I wasn't sitting here and really thinking about how I interpreted things and what I thought they meant, I could imagine reading a lot of these scenes in this book and thinking, okay, so what? It is asking something from you, which always makes a piece of fiction more rewarding, but it also means that you have to read it at the right time when you're willing to put some work in. Anyway, speaking of interactions with people, Hester gets a new rental car and she goes on her way to the city, and who does she run into but fucking John? She passes him hitchhiking on the side of the road just like last time. She pulls over a few meters ahead and she waits for him to like slowly meander up to her passenger side, where he leans down to give her the spiel and then realizes that it's her, and he goes, "This is a completely different car," which I thought was hilarious. I don't know, I love that. Hester agrees to go on John's little side quests, taking photos of abandoned pollution sites, because she feels like the road trip is going too quickly. She is getting too close, too fast, and she isn't really ready to die yet. They drive for a while, they make it to the ammunition processing plant that John was headed for, where they find some kids like skateboarding in one of the abandoned buildings, and Hester tries to play it cool and aloof and uncaring, but she comes to understand that they don't see her as a peer, and therefore someone that they could pick on or dislike or even really have any opinion on, because she is old, because she has changed. She likes to think of herself as someone who is unchangeable, who doesn't blame her trauma for how she is, but who was undeniably, irretrievably affected by it and now can never be a different kind of person. And that has also given her a little bit of arrested development in how she sees herself in terms of age, which is going to come up more in the next interaction that she has, but we're not quite there yet. Her and John look for a hotel, but there's some sort of event happening in the city, which they're in Chicago now, so the only room that they can find is at an ultra luxurious hotel, where John, who Hester calls a street person, does not fit in. He doesn't care about being dirty or rough around the edges and not physically or aesthetically fitting in. This kind of place goes totally against his morals, and he rejects it, and he chooses to sleep outside instead. She does make him agree at least to go for dinner with her. And then, of course, she takes him to a fancy restaurant, and she orders him a steak even though he's a vegetarian, and he accuses her of being a rich person, flaunting her wealth to toy with him, which is exactly what she's doing, and then he walks out. The next day, Hester goes to visit her one and only friend that she's ever had in her life from high school. She has been gunning for Chicago, but she has not let us in on why or the premeditation that has gone into this plan. She gets to Chicago, and all of a sudden she's showing up to an appointment that she has booked with her high school friend May, who is now a therapist. Of course, she has booked this appointment under false information. And she lets May believe that she's someone else for a long time. She never offers up any correction, even when May says, "I'm sorry, do we know each other? Like, you look so familiar." She's like, I just have one of those faces. It's not until May asks what brought her in for this appointment, where she says, "I keep having dreams of killing my father," that there is a long, heavy pause, and May goes, "Oh. You." Hester tries to leave pretty quickly after that, and it doesn't seem like even she knows what she wanted out of this interaction, because they haven't said anything of really any importance to each other. All they've done is see each other, which seeing each other did mean something to Hester. Hester obviously has physically changed enough from her teenage years to not be immediately recognizable, and she can see that May has changed a lot too. The focus isn't centered here in a desire to like hold on to her youth. It's that need for her to be unchangeable, that need for inevitability, because how else is she going to justify her plans? May manages to convince Hester to come for dinner that night, and she agrees, thinking that there's no way that she'll actually go. But she does end up going, and she brings John with her, because in the few sentences that they exchanged in that fake therapy appointment, Hester had lied and said that she and her partner were on a cross-country road trip. Obviously, she cares what May thinks more than really anyone that she's run into so far, both in terms of what May thinks of her life achievements and like hitting the goalposts of life, but also wanting May to think that the circumstances of her visit are less disturbing than the reality. Before dinner, we get a chapter of memories between May and Hester. The two of them were united in high school in their, can you guess, fucked up parental situation. They both had bitterly divorced parents, but Hester wanted to believe that May's dad was just as bad as her own, where May had created a fantasy version of her dad who was this cool, artsy professor who lived in a big, beautiful apartment in the city right near Central Park. Whenever May brought up her dad, Hester would be a sarcastic pessimist, until finally May said, "Why don't you come visit him with me, and I can prove to you that he's not the evil man that you want him to be, that not all dads are like yours." So they skip school and they take the train into the city. They wait for him at the appointed time in a coffee shop, and he doesn't show up. As time goes on, May is getting more and more withdrawn, while Hester is barely holding back her glee at being right. But she won't be satisfied until she has seen this father, who she now knows is exactly who she thought he was, too busy and too careless to meet up with his only child. So she convinces May that he might have had a stroke or a heart attack, and they should go to his apartment to check on him. And May agrees. And when they get there, it's like a pretty nice apartment, but was also greatly exaggerated by May, of course. He lets them in, and he is clearly extremely unwell. He is a hoarder. He's pretty much incoherent, just babbling and puttering around and not making eye contact or even really recognizing that Hester is there too. So Hester was right in a way, but also she was completely wrong in a lot more ways. On the train back home, she knows that her friendship with May is over. She keeps wanting to make eye contact with her and then looking away at the very last second. Finally, she leans forward and whispers in May's ear that she's going to kill her dad. And May, as a 17-year-old, is like, that's not funny, Hester. That's really messed up, actually. And then we're back in the present at May's house for dinner, which is pretty uneventful, all things considered. There's always the threat of things ending explosively in this book, but they haven't gone there yet. Here we're seeing how successful May has managed to be, this very different outcome of someone with similar damage to Hester. She has a loving husband and a daughter and a beautiful home. She's well-adjusted and kind and considerate and practiced in her social behaviors, and she's also not totally unaffected by her past. In Hester's memory of May's dad's apartment, the only thing visible under all of the hoarding were the stark white keys of a piano. And there is also a piano in May's home, and there's a picture on the wall of her office of her daughter and her husband sitting at it. May openly talks about what it was like to clear out his home after he died, with contractors taking bins out slowly over the course of several weeks to not let the neighbors in on what was going on and tank the property value. John behaves pretty well here too, through one of my least favorite tropes, which is I'm pretending that you're my boyfriend, but I haven't told you that, so I'm just gonna answer questions really quickly before you can get a word in until you catch on. Hate it. Pisses me off every single time. Stop that. Just, if you don't want him to react to you telling him this, just tell him while you're waiting for her to answer the door after you've rang the doorbell. Like, fuck off. I hate it. John does catch on, and he's charming enough, but when they leave, he won't stop battering Hester with questions. She doesn't want to be questioned, or doubted, or analyzed, and he won't stop no matter how many times she asks. So she hands him his backpack, and she says, you gotta leave. And he does. And once again, we are left uncertain about John's role in the rest of the story. I wouldn't be surprised or even angry at the absolute ridiculousness of them meeting up again later on in a different city. But this is all I've read up to, so I don't know what becomes of John's fate. I don't even know if she leaves Chicago without him. I'm liking right now that all of the memories that we're seeing of Hester's younger years shows us this lifelong pattern of her trying to be someone else. It's more superficial when she's younger with May, where she wants to be cool like May. She wants to be May. She wishes that she had ordered black coffee like May had, because that seems hard and edgy. And then as she gets older, it's getting more internal. It's more about her view of herself than how others see her, though that part still is, of course, important. We're watching Hester form herself. She doesn't want us to think that her experiences are what formed her. Though, of course, that is delusion. And a lot of Hester's thoughts about herself and the formation of herself and the effect her childhood has had on her are contradictory. They don't make sense. Thinking more frequently about her childhood is making Hester experience more emotions than she did at the start of the book, and when she does experience these emotions, they momentarily paralyze her before they pass, as though all that can get through her internal walls are the feelings that she can't prepare for. When this happens, she also feels confused about why things make her feel a certain way, why an emotion has come up like this, because feeling regret or shame, which are the two major emotions that she has been feeling, that goes totally against the persona that she has so carefully curated. So far, I don't think this book is written like absolutely perfectly, but I do think it's doing a good job at what it's trying to do. Because it is so character focused, I won't really know how much I like this book until I see how it's wrapped up and like where her arc goes. But at the moment, I'm very intrigued and I want to know more about Hester, and I want to know where Ariel Courage is going to take this story. So I will update you when I am another, 70 or so pages in. Okay, bye. Hello, I am like 60 pages from the end now, and I've come here for another little update. The book, the story, the character arc, it certainly has not all come together yet, but I'm still really loving it. I'm endlessly interested in both Hester's present and past, and I have a feeling that it is going to all wrap up in the end. So Hester does not leave Chicago without John. The night that she kicks him out, she can't sleep. This isn't a new problem for her. She's been having more and more trouble sleeping the closer that she gets to her dad, and the more that her tumor and her cancer and her pain progresses and becomes impossible to ignore. But she does know what would fix her sleeplessness this time. She's too stubborn to admit it though, so she tells herself that she's going for a drive to clear her head and she's not looking for John. And then the next sentence is, "I found him at the lake." It's a torrential downpour, it's the middle of the night, and he's just standing there on the shore, and when she calls him over to the car, he looks in at her and his face is almost like harrowed. His eyes are feral. He tells her that a couple of months ago, the place where he is currently standing would have been ankle deep in water, and then he lists some catastrophic climate change statistics, and then this moment passes and he gets in the car. They sleep that night in their hotel room, and in the morning, she feels like she's missing a piece from the night before, but she can't drudge up the memory. The two of them leave and they start road tripping all over the Midwest. She is killing time. She'll take John wherever he wants to go as long as it isn't back the way she came, because even though she can recognize her desire to draw this out longer, she also does need to maintain a sense of forward momentum. Her and John are visiting Superfund sites, which for non-Americans like me, those are sites that the Environmental Protection Agency has called for remediation and cleanup of hazardous waste at. And while they're doing this, they are arguing endlessly about answerless issues regarding environmentalism and climate change. It's not that Hester doesn't believe in climate change, but she doesn't believe in doing anything to fight it. Like we've established, she's a really self-centered person. The two of them also differ on where to lay blame. Her being a lawyer, she is so insistent on having some tangible, suable entity to condemn, while he is more focused on the systemic aspect of it, which does make him pretty openly hopeless. He tells her that he knows what he's doing won't make a difference, but doing this photography and logging of data at least makes him feel better. He also logs all of his own environmental consumerist sins in an obsessive way. He can name the emissions and the impact of basically any choice an American can make. And watching him do this makes Hester think, not really with any regret, of the kinds of claims that she was protecting the company she worked for against. How actively she fought John's plight. How many millions of dollars in cleanup fees she brought down over the years. She then starts thinking about when she was a junior associate at this firm, how the oldest and the least well-liked partner there, Robert, took a liking to her because she took him up on this well-used sarcastic offer to take any of the younger women or effeminate men in the office to the shooting range. When she took him up on this, one of the older women at the firm told her that she didn't have to go, she didn't need to suck up to him, and she thought to herself that it would be more shameful and weird to admit that she wanted to go because she was curious. Whether it says it pretty directly like this chapter or not, every memory that Hester relays to us is an addition to the picture of premeditation that we're building that is leading her to killing her dad. And while I don't really want her to kill herself, the whole story being so implicitly and explicitly about her doing it is making me feel like it's gotta happen. And Ariel Courage would have to pull something crazy and unexpected for me to change my mind about that. She could, but it's going to be a tough feat. This is very different to how I felt at the beginning when I was thinking that this could go either way, though I do think back then I was still believing that the most satisfying thing would be for her to kill her dad. Now I can hardly imagine a satisfying story where she doesn't. Anyway, in the present, they're in an abandoned ghost town in Arkansas, and during one of their many arguments about blame and usefulness when it comes to environmental activism, John and Hester are just about shot and killed by a man who is recklessly hunting out of season. The man does kill the deer that he was actually aiming for, and then John starts yelling at him about how irresponsible and dangerous he is, and the man surprises them with gentleness. He's super apologetic and nice. John is still pissed, both scared after just about being shot, rightfully angry about this guy breaking the rules, and a vegetarian who has just watched a deer be illegally killed right in front of him. Hester, on the other hand, wants to piss John off further and also has been thinking a lot about guns and death, so she takes up the hunter's offer to go for beers after he's done dressing the animal, and she goes over to watch him take this deer apart. It's a test for her to see how well she can handle the blood and the gore and the corpse of it all. When he's done, he again invites them back to his place for beer and deer, but she declines at this point, knowing that she won't be able to pass the next test of eating the creature that she has just watched die and then be taken apart. So Hester and John head on their way, but not before Hester lets John borrow her phone to report this hunter because he is still pacing back and forth about this. They drive for a while and then a siren whoops behind them. Both of the people in the car panic. Hester because of the stolen gun that she has loose and unsecured in the glove box, and John because, as he admits to her while they wait for the cop to saunter slowly over to their car, he has a warrant out for his arrest. There's a tense scene with a jackass cop who's trying all the tricks to get them to squirm, like he sits waiting in his car forever, letting them panic. He's a dick about the state where their plates are from, which they have no connection to. It's a rental car. Hester swears she hears him ask, "Y'all fuck?" She tries to sweet talk her way out of it, but he does ask for her license and registration. The registration that, of course, is in the glove box. She closes her eyes as John reaches for it, and then the papers are in her hand. But as she's passing them to the cop, his radio crackles up and he gets in his car in a hurry and he drives off. There is a way this scene could have gone where it had no tension, because with 100 pages left in the book at this point, you know that Hester isn't going to spend the rest of them in a prison cell. But the possibility that she kills the cop and then goes on the run is very much present here. There's certainly a feeling you get while reading it that this either all ends up okay or it goes absolutely tits up. And I don't think that's really coming across in the way that I'm explaining it to you. It's just something that you get when you're reading the scene. Hester drills John about his arrest warrant, and to no one's surprise, he explains that he has engaged in some ecotage, which, like, you know, felony vandalism of sites belonging to the American government is a kind of a big deal, and also proof that John can put his money where his mouth is. John is really concerned about the gun, and he finally tells Hester that the night that she picked him back up out of the rain, the one where she felt that she had lost some important memory, she had told him that she was dying of cancer. Upon hearing this, of course, her first question is, "Did I tell you anything else?" And he says, "No, what else would there be for you to tell me?" He just wants to hear her say that she isn't planning on using the gun to take her own life. I think it's both sad and fitting that we don't get to see the one time Hester tells someone that she's sick on the page, and also that she doesn't get to remember that. She asks him why he doesn't want her to take her own life, kind of hoping that he'll say, "Because I'll miss you," or "Because I like you." But he says it's because it's a crime against creation. John is very religious. He grew up in a really Catholic family with like 6 or 7 siblings. He went to seminary school, and he can preach about his religious beliefs the same way he can his environmental ones. But he isn't as annoying as you might expect, because unlike with his environmentalism, he doesn't talk about God or religion with the basis, like the root belief that you should believe what he does. He's pretty level-headed about it. He's aware that people don't really want to be preached at about religion, and that he isn't going to do anything by bringing it up all the time. It only comes up when Hester asks about it. It is an easy to forget aspect of John's character, but one that is important to who he is, and I think adds a lot more depth. I would be really interested with him to see like him questioning or justifying his God's part in climate change, or to see if that's like, in his eyes, a human affront to both God and the planet. After a moment of calming down, they keep driving, and then they come across the scene that the cop was called to, which is an oil tanker on its side across the highway. The next chapter is another memory. This one a few weeks after her mom died, where she found a child support check in the glove box of her mom's car, and on it, an address. So of course, as I think an 18-year-old, Hester drove to her dad's house, which was in this new development with nothing else around, just identical duplexes on recently turned earth, like not even grass in sight. The barrenness of this is very visceral. When she knocked on his door, she could feel that there was someone inside standing just on the other side of the door. So she kept knocking louder and louder, and then when she doesn't get an answer, she peeks through the blinds, and she sees the silhouette of her dad there staring at her and recognizing her. And he turns and he books it through the house to the back. By the time she gets around the other side of the building, he has already disappeared into the woods, having jumped out of the kitchen window. She watches him book it, like literally sprint away from her. She wishes that she feels some pride in her presence alone being enough to scare him into running, but she just feels humiliated at being related to this man. She hoists herself up through the window and into his home, which even years after the divorce seems like the empty home of someone who was just starting over. Like there's one sweater in the closet, sparse furniture, a single jar of store-bought sauce in the kitchen. The only thing in here, in this entire area, that really says anything human at all, that points to people living here and like existing here as fully formed human beings, are a sketchbook and a vial of India ink on the table. Hester finds this ink absolutely intoxicating, and she sits in the spot that he was probably sitting before she knocked, and then she slowly, methodically tips this ink over, and she watches it spill across the table and seep into everything. And then she takes one big, long lick of it across his sketchbook page, and with her whole mouth stained black, she leaves. I have to say, I love that it isn't always immediately clear what has triggered a memory for Hester. I think it gets really repetitive and really boring and even irritating for the book to go, I saw the oil spill and then I thought of the ink, and then get into the memory. For the triggering moment to come later in the story that she tells, for it not to be so overt and so clear right away, just a bit of imagery and not the most important part of the story, that really works for me and I'm loving it. And I know that there are memories that have come up in this book that I have not connected to the present day in the same way that the author did when she wrote them, and I really like that. This one is pretty clear, but sometimes it feels like a little Easter egg that Ariel Courage is leaving for you and that you don't need to get. And I think that's a really hard line to walk. In the present day, John and Hester have made their way to Texas. Hester is getting sicker and she's trying to ignore it. Of course, she now wraps her chest in bandages every single day, which helps dull the pain that comes when she eats, when she doesn't eat, when she takes too big of a breath, when she doesn't get enough sleep, which she never does. The bandages also protect the wound that has formed in her skin. At one point, she passes out, and after she comes to, she tells John that it was just because she hasn't eaten, so they end up at a grocery store. When Hester leaves the grocery store with a handful of food, she is met with a brawl of 4 men, and it takes her a moment to realize that John is one of them. They're all shooed away by the grocery store's owner, and he has 2 gnarly black eyes and possibly a broken nose, and he tells her that one of the men threw his beer can on the ground, and John got out of the car and threw the beer can into the garbage, and they didn't like that. Before the owner came out and started hitting them with the broom, getting them to leave, John was yelling for Hester to get the gun, and even afterwards, he stands by this, and she's surprised that this guy who she had read as a pacifist is so quick to violence. The surprise, though, doesn't make her feel like she's in danger around him. While from an outsider's perspective, with just the facts of their story and their relationship, that might seem wildly naive and irresponsible, you as the reader as well, you don't get the sense that John is a danger to Hester or ever will be. The next chapter is another memory, this one centered around that older guy at the firm, Robert. Robert and Hester became weirdly good friends despite his, personality and belief system and bigotry and a general vibe. They go to the shooting range together regularly. He uses his connections to help expedite the process of her getting a gun license, and then he gifts her her first gun for her birthday, a gift that she willingly accepts, despite just 8 years later talking about how much she hates gifts and how she would do anything to avoid her coworkers finding out about her birthday. We, of course, know why she wants this gun. It was never the terminal cancer diagnosis that kicked her into action with killing her dad. That was just the final push to execute a plan that had been in the making for at least 30 years. Once Hester had that first gun in the apartment, it was all she could think about. She couldn't sleep with it around. She started getting superstitious and obsessive, which only worsened when one sleepless night the idea came to her that she should shoot herself. Not to kill, but to maim. To know what she was getting into. We learn here that her plan had always been not just to kill her dad, but to then kill herself. And she wants to prove to herself that she isn't this mentally unwell person fantasizing about a plan that she'll never enact, but someone who has made a serious commitment that she plans to follow through on. So for a few years, that is constantly on her mind. She often holds the gun and aims it at her foot just for practice. I have forgot to mention, but there have been a few times where she's talked about this injury to her foot. And as soon as the idea of shooting herself to test out what it's like comes up, you know that that's where this is going. But she does put it in her back pocket for a few years until that friend of hers, Robert, is accused of sexual misconduct by a younger woman at the firm. Hester justifies not immediately cutting Robert out of her life by saying that she didn't want to believe she was capable of such a gross misjudgment of character. She also does downplay what he's been accused of. He's put on leave to start the process of slowly firing him, and months into this, he comes to Hester and pathetically, desperately, and angrily, feeling like he's been wronged, he begs her to help him out, to defend him as his friend, and of course, importantly, as a woman who is his friend. She tells him that she won't do it, and she uses the advice that he has always given her about her career, which is don't take a winning case. He sulks out of her office, and she goes home that night, and for the first time in months, she picks up the gun and, without overthinking it, shoots herself in the foot. After the blood and the gore and the staring through the hole that she's created in her own body and being rushed to hospital and months of recovery, when she returns to work, Robert's office is of course empty, and she did not get promoted to fill his spot as partner at this firm. Back to the present, Hester and John have made it to West Texas, where they get to a super fun site currently being converted into a strip mall, protected by tall barbed wire fences. John has a plan to do more than just take photos, but he won't let Hester in on it. He does hand her some extra large men's socks to cover up her boot prints with, and then they scale the fence and he tells her to wait where she is, which you do have to kind of think to yourself, why would she scale the fence? at all if you were going to tell her to wait, but sometimes a story does just feel like a story. This was an author writing this in so that the next few things could happen, you know? John does some sort of damage to the vehicles on site, and then they're caught by a security guard as they leave. And while Hester tries her sweet-talking tactic, John's bloody and beaten face from that fistfight makes the guard cuff them and bring them back to his trailer. But he hasn't called anyone, which Hester thinks is a good sign. So she then pulls out the big guns. The porn talk. And this works on him like really well, like way too well. Like it's actually frightening. He basically immediately takes John out of the room and then comes back in and takes his pants off. And he does not uncuff Hester, but he does take off her clothes and then her bandages, and he is faced with this massive wound over her chest, which makes him stop dead in his tracks and accuse her of being a drug user. And then he's too ashamed to continue assaulting her, so he lets her go. And when she leaves the building, John is freaking out. Of course he is. And Hester, who doesn't really think that anything wrong has happened and is still maintaining this illusion of being in control the whole time, is like, what? Like, aren't you happy? I got us out of trouble. She says, it's just sex, don't be naive, which does not calm him down at all. She realizes here that John cares about her and that she somehow got lucky enough that the random man that she picked up on the side of the road was what she calls an ethical genius, which she defines as someone who cares not just about the state of her physical body, but of her soul, while being aware that she doesn't have the capacity to reciprocate that care. That night, the two of them can't find anywhere to stay because they are once again in the middle of nowhere, so they end up needing to pull over and sleep in the car. And almost like a child, like someone vulnerable, Hester keeps saying, John, I can't sleep. So he tells her a story about when he was 7 and he got lost in the woods for 4 days. When Hester hears this, her first thought is abuse or neglect, but John's like, no, they were looking for me. They just accidentally left me at the campsite. That happens when you have 7 children. He talks about being in the woods and running into this wolf who stopped dead in its tracks and just stared him down, and how he had this like insane spiritual experience while he stood there staring at the wolf and feeling no fear. He felt there that the land wasn't just his to be lost in, that there was some larger, ancient intelligence and soul that had nothing to do with him or even people at all. And then the wolf just walked away. And when John was finally found, he tried to tell his mom about what he saw, but she didn't believe him. She told him that there were no wolves in Georgia, that he had maybe ate some bad berries and hallucinated it, or maybe it was a sign from God, or it was a coyote. And that was what made him first take his dad's camera into the woods to try to prove this. When his story finishes, he asks Hester if she believes that it was a wolf and not a coyote or a dream, and she says yes. And that's where I'm at. We have like 50 or 60 more pages to go. I'm still really liking this story so far. The end will make it or break it, which is scary, especially because I am putting so much thought and energy into this very character-focused book. Like, I've just been thinking about Hester and John and who she is and how she's got to this point, and like nature versus nurture and creating a self for a few days now, and I feel very wrapped up in this, and I'm afraid of the potential that it has to greatly disappoint me as a book that has set itself up to be all about the final act, a book that is about an inevitable end. At first, I was thinking that we were going to slowly uncover whatever abuse she suffered at the hands of her dad that involved like the police taking him away and court-mandated therapy and all of these big consequences, but now I'm starting to think that the actual details of the abuse matter a lot less than the effect that it's had on her. And it's kind of making me rethink the almost voyeuristic curiosity that I had at the beginning. Like, ooh, what's this big secret? When, like, really, she was abused. I don't think we really need to know more than that. And the gravity of that abuse has been made pretty clear in the adjacent details that we've been given, with him like running away from her at a full sprint as an adult man. I'm continuing to feel really excited about learning where this is going to go and what the completion of Hester's character arc will look like, and I'm pumped to go finish it and then get back to you with my final thoughts. I'll see you then. Bye. All right, we're done with Bad Nature. Let's get into it. Now a little closer to each other, but still never veering into anything even remotely resembling a romantic relationship, which I greatly appreciate, John and Hester continue their pilgrimage west, heading to the Trinity nuclear site in New Mexico. Here, there's like an obelisk and nothing else to mark the planned, deliberate devastation that took place and continues to take place here. Here at Trinity especially, we're seeing the end of a shift that's been taking place over the course of the book in the way that Hester describes the places that John takes her. She's far more acutely aware of and angered by the injustice of it all, something that we see more in how she narrates these places than in any sudden change in her behaviors. By the time they get to Arizona, really just a state away from her father, she is sleeping so little that she ends up crashing their car into a ditch in the middle of the desert. They're okay, they're a little banged up, the airbags have gone off and into her cancerous chest, and it hurts so bad that she's really nauseous, but she doesn't feel like she needs to go to the hospital urgently. They are afraid, however, of being in the middle of nowhere in the desert with very little water and no charged phone. But then a man with a tractor appears at the top of the hill. He disappears for a few minutes and then he comes back with a bunch more men and a hitch, and he pulls them out and he takes them to his farm. Hester is handed off to a young woman, Arlo, who turns out to be the man named Mr. Black's daughter. Arlo takes Hester to a building with a bunch of cots laid out in a line, and Hester is like, this seems like it might be a cult. But she's hurting and she's tired and she might have hit her head in the crash, so she curls up on one of the cots and she sleeps. You're definitely a little skeeved out with how quickly they split her and John up, but when she wakes up, she finds him easily, and John is enchanted by this place. It's a self-sustaining community of religious people. Like, sure, it's definitely some sort of cult, but it doesn't seem like human sacrificey from where Hester is standing, at least. It actually seems like pretty clearly the kind of place where John would and should end up, where he could be very happy and fulfilled and have some of his personal climate anxiety alleviated. I mean, he fits in perfectly immediately. Hester, as we know her, is far more cynical, and she's joking about how they're going to be caught in the crossfire when these Branch Davidians end up in a standoff with local law enforcement. She doesn't buy into their whole shtick. You have to be a certain kind of person to go along with the cult stuff, and Hester, as we know by now, is not that person. So she's really pushing John to get out of there as soon as possible. Not that she thinks anything bad is going to happen, she just thinks it's kind of annoying and cringy. One night she's in the woman's dormitory and she hears someone sneaking out, and so she sits up and she looks out the window to see that John and Arlo are meeting up and frolicking away together. That same night, with no memory of doing so, Hester also sneaks off into the darkness and she strips down naked and she buries herself in the earth like it might cure her. What she does remember is waking up to all of the women in the commune working together silently to pick her up, carry her to a basin, and clean her with their disembodied hands. When she wakes up in the morning, clean and clothed and rested in her cot, she thinks it was all a dream, and then she sees the dirt under her nails. Hester then has another memory, this time of the last night that her father was in her home. It was her birthday, and after they had cake, him and her mom were fighting, and he was holding her mom up against the wall while she begged him not to do whatever he was going to do next in front of Hester. Usually she would have run outside at the first hint of tension and not been direct witness to his abuse, but this time she was there, and she thought of his BB gun, how she'd been told that they're not like real guns, they don't usually kill people, but sometimes they do. So she ran upstairs and she grabbed it and she came back down to shoot him with it. She got him in the chest, and of course it didn't kill him, but this is her first time that she can really remember having the intention but not the means to do it. He ran after her and she sprinted outside, and this is that scene of him that we got earlier in the book, chasing her through the woods. He did catch up to her and he threw her on the ground, and they laid there panting for a long time before he lightly smacked her and he said, "We'll have to work on your aim." And she was ashamed at her pride in his use of we, in the almost admiration in his voice. She says that she was never able to fully hate him as much as she willed herself to when she was a child. The two of them walked back hand in hand, and when they got to the house, the police were there, and they took him away really without a fight, and that was kind of it. Obviously, her mom was terrified at what he might do to her when they were both out of her sight. So we do actually end up getting some of the pieces put together with Hester and her dad's story. Obviously, a lot of the trouble takes place off page and is left for us to kind of speculate about, but yet again, this book is effectively showing restraint in giving us details, but it's doling out enough for us to understand the gravity and the long-term impact of things, which kind of mirrors how traumatic childhood memories function in your brain. You don't always have a perfect memory of every detail of your life, but you know what your life has done to you. Back with adult Hester, her presence on the compound has changed. During the days before the incident in the dirt, there were a lot of passive-aggressive comments thrown Hester's way about everyone doing their part and extra hands always being needed, while she stubbornly refused to engage in any manual labor, or really any labor at all. She didn't want to be a part of it. But in the days following this, they let her be the sick person that she is, and she lets herself act like the sick person that she is, sleeping and lying in bed all day, every day. She's starting to think that she might have even less time left than her oncologist told her. Once John has finished fixing up her car, they head out. Hester knows that John should stay here, that he wants to stay here, that this is so clearly the right place for him and where he would be the happiest. But she doesn't fight him when he gets in the car, telling her that they have more places to see, even though he seems exhausted and regretful, and you know that he's really only doing it for her. He even has his little mournful goodbye with Arlo, but he goes with her, and they make it through Arizona. At one point, she calls her oncologist from a payphone. She has called him a couple of times throughout this story. Usually it's triggered by something, some big emotional moment that she doesn't know how to deal with, though it's not always clear exactly what. She does hate this dude. The first call was after she met with Caleb, and she left him this very long, rambling, like borderline seeming like psychosis voicemail, where she called him every name under the sun and like threatened him endlessly. This time she calls him and she starts talking to him about one of the places her and John visited, where the indigenous people in the area didn't know that the government had been milling zinc and lead in the river that they picnicked at, and they had been picnicking at this place that was filled with lead and poisoning them. He tells her, like, he's not following. Is she trying to say that environmental factors made her sick? And she says, "Do you think I'd be like this if the world didn't make it so easy? Like, was I always going to be like this?" And then he says to her, "Hester, I need you to do something very simple. I need you to hang up the phone and I need you to call 911. Can you do that for me?" Having been in her head and been privy to thoughts very similar to what she's expressing to him, and also being so close to her spiral this whole time, you can't see where she's ended up in the same way that he, so far removed, can. You're like, what do you mean 911, dude? Like, this is just Hester being Hester. You have watched her decay so closely, it's almost looked like growth. But the oncologist sees her as someone who is acutely not okay, and probably thinks that she's having some dangerous neurological symptoms from her untreated terminal cancer. Of course, Hester tells him, like, yeah, I'm gonna call, I'm putting it in right now, but she doesn't. And it's interesting to be pulled out of being in this spiral alongside her and to look at it from the outsider's perspective. He isn't quite right, though. Hester is coherent and logical enough to continue on her way. I want to say, like, she isn't yet a danger to herself or others in the way he seems to think, but I mean, like, we know that's not the truth. That not being the truth is pretty central to this whole fucking thing. The last city that John and Hester visit is Las Vegas. In Las Vegas, Hester gets herself all dolled up. She does all of the maintenance that she's been neglecting while being on the road, appointment after appointment of her perfecting her physical appearance before she comes face to face with her father. Her and John at one point are walking down the street when they see two angry protesters with their, like, I love Jesus shirts yelling at cars and shit. And she asks him if that was the kind of preacher that his dad was. And he tells her that, yeah, like when his dad was younger, he was kind of like that. But he went to prison and he's different now. She wants the story, of course, and she offers up her dad's story in exchange for John spilling. After a bit of pestering, he does relent. He tells Hester that he didn't tell her the whole story of him getting lost in the woods, that there was a man, and he thought the man was there to save him, but he wasn't, and they ended up finding him in the man's cabin. And then later, John's dad found this man and shot him dead, and he went to prison for a long time because of it. He's only out now because he's sick and old. Hester, a little jealously, tells John that his father is a righteous man, but John strongly disagrees with her. He tells her that it was a waste, and that he never should have done it. He doesn't expand on this when Hester asks him to, but I would think it's part his religious beliefs about, like, crimes against creation, and a larger part that this act, regardless of its righteousness, took his father away from him. She then asks him if he forgives the man in the woods, and he says yes, and she asks why, and he quotes, "Nothing human is alien to me." And then she asks him if he forgives his father, and he says, "It took longer because he was closer, but yes." I don't know that I have all that much to add on to this. I just thought that, like, the word choice and delivery and sentiment of it all was very touching and sad. I think this is one of my favorite parts of the story, and also one of the hardest parts of the story, and one of the most complex parts of the story. Hester, still and always Hester, doesn't really reciprocate with the story she promised without being pushed to. She tells John that her dad hurt her mom, and he asks her why then she's going to see him, and she takes a long time before she says it's a reckoning. And John intuits what this means pretty easily, and he tries his best to talk her out of it, but she doesn't care. Instead, she says, "I want to gamble." And John, the anti-consumerist final boss, says, of course. He doesn't partake, it doesn't go that far, but he comes with her as she gets absolutely plastered and gambles the night away. John is a little disappointed in her because they were meant to head to some lithium mines. He had some plan with the lithium mines in the morning, and she's clearly going to be too hungover to do that now. When she's too sloppy to stand up, he cuts her off and he takes her upstairs to their hotel room, where the light of the TV on the dark walls of the room sends her into a dream about her mother's death, where in her last moments, her mom is asking Hester, making her promise to be happy for her. But she's doing it with like a frightening intensity, like a painful grip on Hester's wrist. Hester wakes up from the dream before dawn, and she leaves John in the room. She has gone from the most messy we have ever seen her to, in just a couple of hours, extremely calculated and clear-headed. She finds 2 notaries to witness her writing John into her will, and then she is off, and in just a couple hours, she's at her dad's doorstep in Death Valley. Hester's panicking, and she's rethinking, and she can hardly get herself to walk up to the door, but she has also lived a life imagining this inevitable end, so there isn't really anything that she can do other than this. She knocks, and no one answers, but she knows he's home. So she goes inside. He's in the shower. She sits down on his couch and she waits. She's like looking around at his home and the life he's made here and how different reality is to the falseness of the life that he projects on his artist website. And she wills her hands to stop shaking. She actually lets him walk by her without noticing so that he can go get dressed. And then when he comes out, she says dad. And even though she has called him dad, it takes him a moment to process that his adult daughter is here standing in front of him. And he knows pretty damn well right away that she is here to kill him. He doesn't try to run, but he does try to minimize, justify, and rewrite the narrative of the abuse that he was the perpetrator of. She's dawdling a little bit. She's walking around listening to him blather on about how his new wife left him and how she's pregnant. She is not flashing the gun, but she thinks that he's probably seen the outline of it tucked into her waistband. And then all of a sudden, he grabs her from behind and they're in an all-out brawl, kicking and biting and grabbing and punching. He gets the gun from her and it goes off. It hits the TV, but it backfires out of his hand and it slides across the room to the door. They are both fighting for their lives. They knock into his drafting table, they spill paint all over themselves. Finally, he gets on top of her and he starts choking her just about to death. As she's on the brink of falling unconscious, a shot is fired and his body collapses onto hers. Something so fucking visceral and awful that she says here is that the sight of the paint and the blood mixing together isn't as sickening as the difference in their temperatures. So her dad's pregnant new ex-wife is standing in the doorway holding the gun. Her hands are shaking, but she calmly sets it down on the table and she starts eating some strawberries and she's like, stop staring at me. I'm pregnant, like I have a craving, sue me. She tells Hester that she knows who she is, that her dad never talked about her and the new wife needed to figure it out all on her own. And then she starts giving her advice, saying that Hester might not be able to talk yet, that she should hold some water in her mouth, but she probably won't be able to swallow it. Super clear, again, without really getting into the details of it, that this man has been similarly hurting the women in his life for many, many years. Hester faints, and when she wakes up, the other woman is gone. She calls the police, but it takes them a while to get there because it's all hands on deck with an explosion at a nearby lithium mine. She takes the fall for her dad's murder, but she does not end up taking herself out. She ends the book dying of cancer in a hospital bed. Obviously, it is an ending that is extremely bleak and difficult and upsetting, but it doesn't necessarily feel like it's totally all for naught. Hester has gone through this absolutely enormous amount of growth over the course of her road trip. She becomes more and more honest with us and also with herself. She understands herself better. She proves her fundamental idea that she is an unchangeable person wrong. Even just with her cynicism alone, she might not admit that she's changed in that regard, but you can see it in the way that she describes things to you differently over the course of the book. We also learn that this story was written by her from her hospital bed in that journal that her receptionist got for her at the start, the one that she turned her nose up at the possibility of reflection. Hester maintains her unlikable personality throughout the story, but this is a testament to that ancient philosophy. Nothing human is alien to me. You cannot help yourself but connect to her on some level, to feel for her, to want the best for her, even though she can be absolutely grating and exhausting and selfish and nihilistic. And like I've said before, she doesn't come around on those things. This isn't a beautiful, tender story of Hester creating connections that bring her isolated self back down to earth and into humanity's arms. I love a story with very strong characterization that's able to show the characters growing without sacrificing who they are, and I think it's a really difficult thing to accomplish that Bad Nature does very well. I thought both of the major characters had really well fleshed out personalities and histories and worldviews. They both felt very real to me, and I liked that I could both anticipate their reactions to things and still be surprised by them. They never felt stale, despite how intensely character-focused and long of a novel this was. Every character was a little eccentric without ever feeling like it's just a carousel of caricatures. The end is depressing and bleak, but it's real. You get this very vivid sense of that emptiness that follows in the wake of a revenge that someone has been waiting for their whole life to carry out. Her dad is dead, and he needed to be, and I'm glad he is, and I think I feel a modicum of the emptiness that Hester feels at the same time as being glad about it. Kind of like a, that's it? Or like, now what? You know, it manages to be a mirror of the character's emotions rather than a fault of the book's execution, though. I don't feel unsatisfied. I feel what Hester is feeling. I think all of the parallels that you can draw with Hester's cancer and her dad's impact on her and pollution and like forever chemicals and things that impact and then colonize that impacted thing, like abuse, like cancer, like pollution, are all very interesting and never feel super contrived. This book isn't always subtle, but it does trust its reader with subtlety. Like I've said, a lot of it is left for you to piece together and figure out the significance of and the connections between. And that really worked with the way that I read it here, doing this little deep dive into it. And I think there is even more that I missed because this book is thematically dense without requiring you to pick up on all of the themes. Sometimes it just gestures towards them, and it somehow manages to be engaging and thought-provoking, whether you pick up on that every time or not. The writing is solid all the way through, from word choice to sentence structure to pacing to general narrative. I didn't think it was absolutely exceptional, but there wasn't much that stood out to me as bothersome. I really liked the dialogue, which is something that I think is really hard to get right for me. Every once in a while, there's a sentence that isn't grammatically incorrect, but it's phrased in an awkward way that made me have to stop and read it over a couple of times to parse the meaning of it, and I would have had a better time if I wasn't pulled out of the story every so often like that, because otherwise, this does a pretty great job of immersing you in the story with this very vivid, visceral, sharp writing from this strong narrative voice. I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was intelligent and insightful and dark and real and raw, and then also kind of witty and funny at times. It's one of those books where I can't really point to any reason why it isn't a 5-star, but there was something missing, which is so unhelpful to say as a reviewer, and I apologize. It is very good, and I would recommend it, and I have pretty much nothing but praise for it, but it also isn't something at this moment that I think quite reaches the level of other 5-star books for me. You know what I mean? It is, though, something that I think I could sit with, and it has the potential to get there over time depending on how it impacts me in the long term. Thank you for joining me along on this one. I'm often doing like really intense deep dives into books that are terrible, like for shits and giggles, and I had a great time doing that with this book that I was expecting to and ended up really liking. It is kind of fun to be so immersed in something for a few days. It's like almost all-consuming. I felt like a crazed professor or something like that, which is not a feeling that you can really get from reading a shitty popular 2000s young adult book. Anyway, I'll see you next time. Bye. And happy holidays. Kill your dad.